I want to start today's show with this scene from America's Next Top Model.
And you come in here with a defeatist attitude. I don't have a bad attitude. Maybe I am angry inside. I've been through stuff, so I'm angry.
Yes, but it's not, this is not, be quiet, Tiffany. Be quiet!
That's what is
I'm
wrong
not
with
trying
you.
to act, but you're not.
Stop it!
I have never in my life yelled at a girl like this. When my mother yells at this, it's because she loves me. I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. How dare you?
That is probably the most famous, most viral, and most memed moment from the entirety of America's Next Top Model. Look, you know the show. You know that Tyra Banks created the show and she hosted it, along, of course, with Miss J and Jay Manuel and Nigel Barker. Together, they were a force. They dominated television in the early 2000s. Well, there is a brand new Netflix docuseries on America's Next Top Model. It's basically a play-by-play of all the major controversial moments of that show.
We are actually going to switch your ethnicities.
Ooh, baby girl, baby girl.
Bee Quammie's here, Amil Niazi's here, and Chris Murphy's here. Hello, all of you.
Hello.
Oh, wow. What
It's nice to have you here. Oh, well, I was going to say that, like, I was watching your faces as we were playing that clip off the top, and there was like a discomfort hovered over the room. Bee was just shaking her head. Chris is like, I can't believe we have to live through this again. Chris, maybe I'll start with you about that scene. Like, there's something with that. First of all, that scene is from 2005. It has endured 21 years later. Why do you think it's still the most talked about moment from that show?
I think it's because it felt like we were seeing something that we weren't supposed to see. It actually felt real and not constructed like so much of reality television. I would argue that's probably one of the top 10 most famous moments in all of reality TV history. Tyra screaming at Tiffany, because it did feel like, as the documentary said, Tyra was coming from a place of profound disappointment, more so than the show. And we heard on the documentary from Jay, and Tiffany on social media said there was stuff that we didn't even see. They cut out stuff that Tyra said that we didn't even see. So I think it got really nasty, really terrible. And Tyra really seemed to crack in that moment in a way that was terrible, but also authentic, which I'd be curious to hear what other people think. There was a big veneer with Tyra, on the show and also in the documentary. So to see her just let it rip like that was really crazy.
Amil, I'll come to you on this in just a moment, but B, maybe I'll get your response, because the most telling line of that sort of scene to me is, my mother yells at me because she loves me. And like, she delivers it with this sort of like, there's a crack in her voice. But why do you think this is a scene that stayed with people for so long?
Yeah, like Chris said, I think it was just so visceral and so real along it really interrupted kind of everything we had seen up to that point in the show. And knowing Tiffany's backstory and how she came to be on the show in that moment, I think it also revealed a really interesting mirror between Tyra and Tiffany and how Tyra maybe viewed herself, or how she views other young Black women and who she is now and who she can be to young Black women. So I think it was a really interesting mirror that, especially now knowing that there was so much more that actually was edited out that they decided to leave on the cutting room floor. Yeah. I don't know if it makes Tyra look any better, but authentic is definitely the word. So yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah, Amil, I think the story of Tiffany itself is kind of really telling and revelatory about like what ANTM was trying to do. Like, so the woman that she's the one being yelled at there, and the edit that she got in the show is like, she's someone with anger management issues who wanted to sort of change her life. And then like a lot of models on the show came from really vulnerable backgrounds like Tiffany. Talk to me about like how ANTM approached casting Amil.
Yeah, I mean, Tiffany was also a single mom. There were a lot of single moms cast on the show, which I think is part of the storyline that Tyra liked. I think she really liked the idea of plucking someone out of a quote unquote hard life, plucking them out of obscurity and giving them this fairy tale. And I think she loved that, the drama that comes along with that, but also that it makes her look like the fairy godmother. And, you can really tell throughout the show, and I've been watching since literally day one, you get this sense that Tyra is like a really raging narcissist, and she always positioned herself as the one that was going to save these girls. And that comes across in her speech, is like, I was going to save you. I was going to give you a better life, and you let me down. And everything else that Chris and B said about that moment is true, but that moment is also very reflective of what Tyra wanted from this show and out of these girls and who she picked to be America's Next Top Model. She loved that idea of taking someone out of a life that's bad in her mind and giving them this fantasy. And in that moment, you really realized how deep that ran.
I'm interested in that framing. I'm interested in that framing of Tyra sort of trying to be fairy godmother, because it also comes in the context, of what the fashion industry was at the time, or maybe still is, but what it was at the time, which is like very aloof, very exclusive, right? Like Tyra was trying to say, I'm here to open doors to people who have faced discrimination in the face of, like she had faced discrimination coming up in the world of fashion. And she was trying to say, I would like to do something different. I would like to open these doors. Do you think on that premise alone, do you think that Tyra was successful in doing that?
So I would say that the show itself was not the game changer in the fashion industry that she may have wanted it to be. It didn't break any barriers, really. The show itself did not change how photo shoots run. They did not change how different girls are seen when they go for go-sees and auditions and things like that. And Tyra herself was very contradictory during the series when she wanted to buck the system and buck the trend, and when she wanted to fall in line and when she expected the girls to fall in line as well. So she didn't even fully believe her own premise throughout the entirety of the show.
Right.
And it was very interesting what she chose to push against and what she chose to kind of hold firm to in terms of how the industry was. And I think with her background, she kind of reminds me of like immigrant parents sometimes, when it's like, they had a hard life and they made it, and now you've got it a little bit easier, but they still want to make sure you know how hard it can be. Like Tyra was kind of doing a little bit of that, with these girls.
I love an entire panel of children of immigrant parents being like, yeah, that's 100% true.
We know what that is. But the game changers, I think, were the actual girls, the contestants who, whether they won or not, what they did after, when we think about people like Winnie Harlow, who Winnie said the show was, didn't do anything for her career. But we saw Winnie, we saw Takara, we saw these different girls who then went on to do something different. Yeah. And even if it was just like a little small dent in the system, the girls and their perseverance did it more so than the show, I think.
I was going to say, so like Danielle Evans, who wins Cycle 6 of the show, she's in this docuseries, and she had some pretty scathing words for Tyra. B, do you want to just contextualize what Danielle had to say?
Oh, so Danielle, the big things with Danielle were talking about her gap. That was a big thing. And me being a gap tooth girl, I loved Danielle. I was like, listen, I see the representation. She's doing something for me. But that was a real sticking point for the judges. So a lot of her story was talking about that tug of war between her not wanting to change anything about her smile, but them saying like, first, they were like, you're not going to get work. Secondly, you're going to go home. And what was really heartbreaking for me with Danielle was when she called her mom. And going back to Amil's point about kind of the vulnerabilities of these girls, she called her mom to kind of be like, this is what they want me to do. And you could tell she was uncomfortable, but her mom's like, well, if you don't do it, they're going to send you home. So that vulnerability shows in the family, who's kind of like, well, girl, do what you got to do, because we're all back home hoping that this will change things for you and for the rest of us. Yeah. So she eventually did change it, and was very bitter when she saw in later seasons a white model who had a gap that Tyra wanted to widen. So, Danielle was
that gap was celebrated. It's like a whole different thing.
It was very celebrated, right? And then even thinking about post-show, the idea of how the show really was kind of a stain for her in her modeling career, and that she was told, she was roommates with Chanel Iman, and all of the girls are going out there getting their casting calls, they're going out to things, and Danielle was told, like, you're not getting anything because they just see you as a reality star. They don't see you as a real model. And Tyra reached out to her and explained that she knew she was struggling and didn't really do anything to help her. So you could tell Danny was carrying a lot from this whole experience, and a lot of deserved, and understood bitterness and things with everything she went through. So
I'll get to the docuseries in just a moment, but I guess I want to talk about how ANTM sort of treated the photo shoots, Chris, because I think that's a useful thing to talk about. Let's talk about those photo shoots. They involve these elaborate sets. They involve a lot of like props and themes, and sometimes some deep controversy. At least 2 different photo shoots, they had girls sort of posing as different ethnicities, basically doing black and brown face.
The challenge here really is taking on the persona of that other ethnicity while in the photograph and owning it. You're gonna be an East Indian Tiffany. You're gonna be Native American. Brittany, an African American woman.
How do you feel about the way that was addressed in the documentary? Because I was a little mad about that part, but I'll let you talk.
Yeah, there was a lot of finger pointing. There were a lot of people sort of pointing to other people, Tyra and Jay and Miss J, and all of these people who were all complicit to some degree. Were like, well, it wasn't my idea; it was coming from the network. Tyra at one point said, "The audience, you pushed us to make these girls do crazy things because that's what you wanted to see."
It was very, very intense. But you guys were demanding it, and so we kept pushing more.
I was 12 when I watched this. I'm not responsible.
You weren't asking for blackface on your television, Chris?
No,
I don't think
wasn't
you were.
asking for blackface on my television. But there was this notion of, it was primarily, as B said, a TV show more than a runway to get people in the modeling industry.
Yeah.
And what makes TV is conflict and, stunts and having, putting these girls in really precarious and dangerous situations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they didn't even mention a photo shoot where they doused all the girls in olive oil and made them bake in the sun, for a photo shoot. They're hanging from wires. They're getting hypothermia in pools, all these things. And Ken Mock even says it. It's like, it made for great TV, but it was really dangerous in regards to, the girls' health and their well-being. And sometimes they would get psychological. What they did with the violent crime photo shoot and playing on Dion's past trauma where her mom was shot and then making her dress up as the victim of gun violence. Like it was diabolical. And that must be said.
Well, I was gonna say, so you mentioned Ken Mock. Ken Mock is the executive producer of the show. Amil, he did admit that he felt bad about that crime scene. That crime scene photo shoot. Do you want to just remind people what happened there and what Ken Mock had to say about it?
Yeah, I mean, they had them lie down basically in like chalk outlines and recreate a violent crime scene. It was insane. I don't really know if there's another word for it.
Yeah.
And it's funny that is the photo shoot that Ken Mock feels like he has to apologize for. It's like, that was bad. I remember watching it and being like, what in the world? They're not going to make them do that, surely. But like Chris said, there were so many photo shoots that really like put them in danger and sacrifice their health and their mental well-being. And it's funny that Ken Mock feels like that was, and he sort of says like, that did cross the line. But I just feel like the line was so blurry at that point that they must have received a lot of pushback from a lot of people behind the scenes for him to apologize for that one shoot, because I really think, as weird and strange and uncomfortable as it was, at that point, it just felt part of the ecosystem.
I gotta tell you, it was a relief just to hear that Ken Mock has a line. Like I think that was like, as I was sort of like responding to that, I was like, well, at least at a certain point he goes, okay, this is maybe where we went a little bit too far. B, one of the surprising participants in the documentary is Shandi from Walgreens, Shandi from Cycle 2. And so she pops up. She's a shy, nerdy, small town girl who works at a drugstore. And then her photographs were really strong until one night in Milan. Do you want to describe what happened and the way that it was framed back then when it first aired?
Yeah, I remember it when it aired. So Shandi, kind of gangly girl who was working in Walgreens and makes her way to the show, and very much was kind of like, this I wouldn't say ugly duckling, but shy duckling that was kind of blossoming into this swan. So they're in Milan for the show's first international trip. They do a photo shoot. She's amazing. They have these cute guys show up with Vespas to take them around. And those guys end up being invited back to the hotel that evening. Now, everybody's drinking. They're in like a little hot tub. There's things happening. Now, Shandi has a boyfriend back home, but she's getting a little flirty with one of the Vespa boys. They start kissing. They end up sleeping together. And all of this is, you know, caught on camera.
Yeah.
All of, like, as much as they could show on network, but you clearly knew what was going on with Shandi and this guy in Milan. You see the next day she's racked with guilt. She calls her boyfriend. She confesses what happened. They've taped that as well. And he loses it. He completely loses it. So the narrative becomes, you know, Shandi cheated on her boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes all about kind of this judgment on Shandi. And that's kind of what we knew. That's what we saw. We didn't really, at least I did not have the vocabulary to look at things and think about consent and think about assault and what we were seeing on screen.
Yeah.
But Shandi coming on to the docuseries to explain that she was so drunk, she was blacked out. She couldn't consent to anything that was happening. She didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And she was so traumatized by the fact that production chose to just keep the cameras rolling instead of intervening to get her out of that situation. So I was so surprised to see her, but so proud that she came on to kind of really express her perspective and how things went and the things that we did not understand about how all that played out.
Yeah, as you watch the docuseries, you get to hear Shandi say, yeah, production should have intervened in this. Well, you also hear Ken Mock saying they treated it as a sort of a documentary that was kind of unfolding in front of them. How'd you feel about that moment in the docuseries, Amil?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting that Ken Mock says he looked at it as a documentary and that he was very clear with the girls that, you know, the cameras are going to be on you 24/7. They're going to record every single thing. And don't imagine that you're never off camera. And you really get a sense of what they were trying to do. But I just think it's so exploitative to treat a show like this as a documentary. In no way, shape or form is this anything but a constructed reality show where you are meant to take care of the people that are on your show. And we see now how much reality TV has changed for the better. You know, I still think it's obviously a very exploitative genre, but there are so many protocols in place now to take care of people. They have a lot of people on set to make sure that people are comfortable, that they're being taken care of, that their mental health is in a good place, that their physical health is in a good place. And this moment, Shandi talking about it and Ken Mock's idea of what it should be is really revelatory and really shows you how far reality TV has come, and that I just can't imagine how horrible that set must have been for the girls, knowing that that's how they treated them.
Mm-hmm. B, let me ask you this. When you got into modeling yourself, like how much did you think America's Next Top Model maybe reflected the reality of the fashion industry, where you're like, it's going to be a little bit like what I'm seeing on television?
It was kind of a mixed bag.
Okay.
Like I looked at things like, you know, I took the runway walk tips from Miss J. So I'd be watching the show and then, you know, Miss J's out there doing her thing and I'm in the living room practicing and I'm like, okay, I think I got it, you know?
Yes.
Or thinking about things with like angles and your face and what's your face doing in the photo shoots, or thinking about how to, you know, kind of present myself when I go on go seeds. Those were things that I was studying from the show.
Yeah.
And those were things that I felt were realistic to some level and things that I kind of employed to some level when I started doing things. But even from like first watch, I still had this sentiment of like, okay, this is TV and it's fashion, but it's TV. So getting more into the industry, I started to see more and more of just how much this was actually television and not fashion. Right. So you know, there were things that I could study, the things that did feel representative and realistic, but eventually that veneer kind of faded. And I was like, I don't know if I need to be studying the show anymore as I continue doing this stuff, because, you know, it might have me out here looking kind of wild. But yeah, definitely a mixed bag.
And we all practiced our walks
I'm sure
right on this day.
Exactly.
Just to be clear.
We said it. Both Chris and Amil were like,
walks.
oh yeah, of course. We were all copying Miss J in the living room. That is 100%.
That's what we were doing.
Great teacher.
Chris, let me ask you this. Tyra says in the documentary that she wanted to make a modeling reality show that married American Idol and the real world at MTV. How do you think a show like ANTM shaped reality television as we know it since then?
I mean, I do think she did she did succeed at that.
Yeah.
Like she did marry those two shows pretty successfully, and you can see other shows that have been created in its wake that model the concept. I mean, I don't think you get Drag Race without America's Next Top Model.
Yes.
Right. I think it's sort of like a one-to-one there. So I do think like she has left a legacy of creating a successful, reality television franchise. I do think reality television has changed a lot since the days of ANTM, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot more guardrails, I think, in terms of what producers can and can't do to these people. I mean, just hearing about the girls, they were so isolated from their families. They're so, they didn't have phones. They didn't have internet. They weren't able to contact their loved ones and whatnot. And I know that still exists. There are embargoes. They keep people in hotels and whatnot. But I do think the culture behind the scenes has changed a lot. But the format, it's an enduring format. She struggled with that, I gotta say.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, the docuseries itself opens with Tyra being like,
I haven't really said much, but now it's time.
and it does end with Tyra saying, wait until you see what we have in store for you for cycle 25. If this docuseries is ostensibly about taking accountability, Amil, how do you think that lands? Do you kind of walk away from these 3 episodes going, yeah, I feel pretty satisfied that Tyra knows what she should be accountable for?
No, I think Tyra Banks is doing what she does best. She's constructing a reality that suits her narrative, and she is presenting an option for herself to carry forward. I will be very interested to see how a younger generation responds to this, because I think there's a nostalgia element for people like us who've been watching since day one originally. Tyra mentions about the pandemic and how it introduced the show to a new generation of viewers. Those viewers have a very different relationship with things like consent, with things like, the way we treat people on a show like this. So I'll be very curious to see if this really watery mea culpa that she's offered resonates with a new generation, and she needs that generation in order to actually move forward. So it didn't land for me. I'll be curious to know if it lands for Gen Zs.
Chris, one of the smart things that this docuseries does is sort of like like the opening is cut with a lot of TikToks of like younger people, mostly Gen Z, watching ANTM with horror, with being like, what? They did what? They said what? I'm like, you see the reaction, and then you cut to Tyra. And so like it makes it seem like she's like trying to address and talk directly to those criticisms and the ways that some of the choices that she made 20 years ago are sort of being received now. What's your impression of this? Do you kind of walk away from this doc going like, I feel like some things were accounted for. There's some accountability that was taken.
I would say less than 20% for sure. There was some acknowledgement that mistakes were made. But again, there was a lot of finger pointing and a lot of, it was a sign of the times. Like, a lot of blaming the culture writ large. But you're sort of in charge of the culture. You're creating the culture. You are Tyra Banks. You're a supermodel. You have we're getting that. It's top down. Like if you're not creating the culture, then who is? And of course, there is the modeling industry and certain standards. But I think what Amil said was so great. And B, picking and choosing when we're going to shirk something and when we're going to embrace something is really confusing for these young minds that we're taking in the show. So I think you could sort of see there was one clip in the documentary where it's right before Tyra, they click the clack and they're like, you're on, and you can see her turn on and sort of smile and get her camera face on, and it really haunted me because there's a performance even in the documentary of performing accountability without really taking accountability that I think has to be called out.
That is so real. I totally I clocked that moment as well. But also to me, the most recurrent thing of that entire documentary is this is what it was like. Boy, you should have been there in the early 2000s because things were crazy. And it's that is true, but also we are accountable for the choices that we make. B, what about you in terms of the sense of accountability that you got from Tyra and crew? What did you take away from it?
Well, I think the ending really kind of clarifies where I stand on it, because right before Tyra, does this whole, cliffhanger about wait till you see what we do for cycle 25. She says, that, again, she basically puts it back on everybody else. And she kind of says, I've been out here, taking what I got to take. I've been taking my criticisms, and I hope all you out there are open to taking your criticisms when it's your time, because your time's going to come. I'm like, why are you threatening me? I'm just tuned in. I don't know why you're threatening me. And, she says this whole spiel, and it cuts and it goes immediately to Danny, who's like, girl, that's ridiculous. Like, we need to just end it. We need to wrap this up. And I was like, you know what? Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, there's definitely a performance, like Chris said.
Yeah.
Tyra has never been the strongest actress, so I don't think that really, played out the way she might have desired. But we'll see. I'm very curious, like Amil said as well.
I have to say, life size. Come on, you got to give her some credit.
Okay, you know what? No. She does get it for life size. I'll give her that.
I just appreciated the moment when you said, "Hey, all you take when she said, "All you take some responsibility," and as you were recounting that, the biblical eye roll that Amil Niazi gave. I'm like, oh my God, how could you possibly say that to all of our faces? I got to leave it there, but I really appreciate your time. You guys have been wonderful. Thank you so much for this. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, of course. Amil Niazi is the author of the memoir Life After Ambition. She writes a column at The Cut. Bee Quammie is a culture critic and author of The Book of Possibilities. And Chris Murphy writes for Vanity Fair. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. Hey, we're going to be around tomorrow, so if you're not doing anything, if you're around, would you please come and hang with us? Have a great day.